Dr. Elena Carter stood still before the towering glass facade of Hayes Capital. The sunlight shimmered against the pristine windows, but no light could break through the storm swelling in her chest. She was used to the crisp whites of the operating room, the rhythm of heartbeats beneath her skilled hands. But today, there was no stethoscope around her neck, just a navy business dress and a heart beating wildly beneath the fabric. 5 years ago, Elena had walked away from this world, and from the man who ruled it, Julian Hayes, once the center of her universe. Now he was a hardened CEO reigning over a financial empire, and she, without any other choice, had returned to ask him for help, knowing the cost might be far more than financial. Her father lay in a hospital bed awaiting a heart transplant. Carter Medical Group, her family's legacy, teetered on the edge of collapse. But beneath all that, Elena understood the deeper truth. This return wasn't just about saving a business, it was about confronting a wound that had never truly healed. The elevator carried Elena to the top floor. Each blinking number matched the pace of her racing heart. When the doors opened, she was met by a sharp-eyed woman, Julian's longtime assistant. "Mr. Hayes is expecting you," she said, leading the way with no hint of warmth. The dark wooden door creaked open. Julian Hayes sat behind a walnut desk, bathed in golden afternoon light pouring from the floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't look up, not at first, as though she were just another trivial appointment. Elena stepped in, her spine straight, though her legs trembled slightly. "Dr. Elena Carter," Julian said finally, voice low and dry. "Didn't think you'd ever set foot here again." She bit the inside of her cheek. "I didn't come for myself. I came for my father, for Carter Medical Group. We need help, and you're the only one who can provide it." Julian leaned back, his steel gray eyes slicing through her. "And why would I help you? After everything you did?" Elena said nothing. 5 years ago, she'd walked away without explanation because his mother, Vivian Hayes, had threatened to destroy her family and revoke her medical license. But Julian never knew, and if he did, would he even believe it? She steadied her breath. "Because you can. This isn't a plea. It's an investment opportunity. If you want a full restructuring plan, I have one ready." Julian laughed, a hollow, humorless sound, still sharp as always. "But I don't buy pretty speeches." He stood and walked toward her, each step tightening the air around them. "I'll help, but I want something worth my price." Elena's breath caught. "And what is your price?" Julian stared her down. 1 year. "You'll be my wife, on paper, and you'll give me a child." "You're not serious," she whispered, taking half a step back. Julian didn't blink. "You need money. I need stability. To silence the board after last year's scandal. A wife, a child, a perfect public image. It benefits us both." Each word hit like stone against her chest. As a doctor, she had sworn to preserve life, to uphold dignity, not to turn her body into a bargaining chip. But Julian's gaze remained cold, unmoving. He wasn't begging. He was making a deal. Elena turned toward the window. The city lights shimmered beneath the waning sun, distant like a world she no longer belonged to. She thought of her father, lying in a hospital bed, waiting for one final hope. She thought of the nurses, doctors, and staff at Carter Medical, counting on her to fight. She turned back to him, eyes unflinching, her voice sharp as steel. "I have conditions. After 1 year, I leave. No strings. If I choose, I retain custody, and you restructure Carter Medical completely, not just a loan." A flicker of a smile curved at Julian's lips. "You still know how to play the game." He pulled a file from his desk drawer. "My lawyer will draft the contract, but remember this, Elena. Once you sign, there's no turning back." Elena wanted to scream, to tell him that 5 years ago she hadn't walked away for selfish reasons, that his mother had cornered her with power and fear. But she said nothing. What good would the truth do when Vivian Hayes still loomed like a shadow over their lives? "You don't know anything," she whispered, hoarse. Then she signed. The black ink bled into the page like an open wound. She slid the contract toward him. "It's done. Are you satisfied?" Julian flipped through the pages, eyes never leaving her face. A faint, bitter smirk touched his lips. "Welcome to hell, Elena. From now on, you belong to me." Julian Hayes's penthouse crowned the tallest building in the city, lavish like a dream and cold like a cage. Its glass walls looked out over a city of glittering lights, but Elena felt only emptiness. She stood still in the living room, arms wrapped around herself as if holding on to the last thread of warmth. Julian sat a few feet away, a glass of whiskey in hand, eyes distant, like she was nothing but a tenant. Since she'd moved in, he had spoken only once. "Your room's at the end of the hall. Don't disturb me unless necessary." She was no stranger to pressure, to facing death on the operating table, but here, under the roof of the man she once loved, Elena felt stripped bare. No longer a surgeon, no longer the woman who once dreamed of forever. But as she turned to walk away, his voice broke the silence, dry yet not entirely emotionless. "How was surgery today?" She paused, caught off guard. "A 6-year-old girl, congenital heart tumor. My team saved her." She hadn't planned to say much, but the image of the little girl smiling after waking up softened something inside her. Her breath slowed. For a fleeting moment, she wasn't Julian's contractual wife. She was a doctor, delivering miracles. Julian looked at her, and something in his eyes flickered. Less ice, more memory. He stood, walked to the wine shelf and poured 2 glasses. "Drink with me," he said. It wasn't a request, but this time it didn't cut. They sat in silence, each holding their glass of wine as if it could shield them from the truth neither dared to speak. Soft jazz murmured from hidden speakers, casting a tender illusion over the sharp edges of the room. Lena couldn't remember exactly when the frost began to thaw. Perhaps it was when Julian pulled out the old leather notebook, the one she had left behind in their college apartment. The pages were filled with notes on cardiac anatomy, her handwriting still as familiar as breath. "You left this," Julian murmured, voice low and rough. "I kept it, because I didn't know whether to hate you or hope you'd come back." Elena wanted to say she never stopped loving him, that she was forced to walk away, but her throat closed up, and then, like a tide too strong to resist, Julian reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. They were warm, far warmer than his voice had been. "Tell me, why did you leave me?" She didn't answer. She just looked into his eyes and saw in them the same heartbreak she carried. And then they kissed. A kiss full of sorrow and longing. That night they found each other again in shadows and memory, not for the contract, but for what they once had and had never truly let go. But in the morning, Elena woke on the sofa, sore and silent. A folded note sat beside her. "Don't confuse this, it's just part of the contract." She read it twice, 3 times. The words never changed. A deep humiliation rose in her chest, choking out the remnants of emotion she hadn't yet dared to name. She had thought last night meant something, a flicker of realness in him, a crack in the glacier that was Julian Hayes. But no, it had been an obligation. A clause. Executed. In the days that followed, Elena grew quieter. She buried herself in her surgical work, a high-risk heart procedure on a newborn boy. But while her mind raced, her body began whispering truths she couldn't ignore. Morning nausea, lingering fatigue, a sudden aversion to coffee. One evening, she reached into the medical cabinet of her private hospital office. A pregnancy test, 2 bold pink lines, clear, unmistakable. Elena sank into the chair behind her. As a doctor, she understood the science. As a woman, a mother, her heart stirred with something deeper. This child wasn't born of love, but it was hers, a part of her. She told no one, monitored her vitals, created her own prenatal plan. She treated herself the way she'd treat any fragile, precious life in her care. But she didn't tell Julian. Until one afternoon, after an exhausting 8-hour surgery, a private obstetrician arrived at her office, sent by Julian. Then came the security team. Then the message. She was to move into his estate by the weekend. That night, Elena stood before him in the penthouse, fists clenched at her sides. "You don't get to control me like this," she said, voice trembling but firm. "I'm a surgeon. I know how to care for myself and this baby." Julian stepped closer. His gaze was still guarded, but his voice softened slightly. "I don't question your skill," he said, "but I don't take chances. Not this time." What might have sounded protective instead chilled her to the core. He hadn't asked how she felt, hadn't asked what she wanted. He only saw a child and the woman carrying it as a vessel. Elena sat quietly in the large reading room of her Julian's countryside estate, the place he had designated as her safe retreat for the past several weeks. The cream-colored walls, soft lighting, and meticulously arranged bookshelves gave the illusion of comfort, but to her, it felt more like a gilded cage. She held her phone close to her ear, voice barely above a whisper, as if even the walls might be listening. "Naomi, I don't know how much longer I can do this," she murmured, tracing the rim of her orange juice glass. "I know Julian thinks he's protecting the baby, but sometimes it feels like I'm just a contract-bound surrogate." On the other end, Naomi sighed. "Why did you leave him, Elena?" Elena was silent for a moment, then she spoke, her voice catching. "I tried so many times, but then I remember the look in his mother's eyes. Vivian Hayes came to my apartment. She had files, proof of our clinic's debt. She said she'd send my father to prison and have my license revoked. I wrote Julian a letter, left it in his mailbox, but she took it, burned it in front of me." "Oh my God," Naomi breathed. "He never knew." Elena nodded slowly, though her friend couldn't see. "He thinks I left him without a word, and I hate myself for letting him believe it." What Elena didn't know was that, just outside the door, where the library hallway curved in silence, Julian stood still. He had only come to remind her about her prenatal checkup that afternoon, but now her words poured through the half-open door like fire. At first, he refused to believe what he heard. His mind fought the truth, clinging to old wounds. But as her words sank in, the disbelief gave way to a deep, raw ache. He had been wrong, deeply, unforgivably wrong. He turned away, heart hammering. Everything he believed for the past 5 years might have been a lie carefully spun by the one woman he trusted most. Julian drove like a man untethered, tires skimming across rain-slicked streets. What he'd just heard couldn't be real. Elena had never betrayed him. She had written a letter. She left to protect her family. And he had hated her for 5 years, thrown daggers with every word, all because of a lie spun with careful precision. He arrived unannounced at his mother's estate. Vivian Hayes sat in her vintage armchair, swirling red wine, composed as ever, as though she hadn't destroyed a love story with her bare hands. "Julian, this is unexpected," she said, without looking up. "Let me guess, about the doctor again?" "Don't call her that," Julian said, jaw tight. "I want the truth. What did you do 5 years ago?" Vivian raised her gaze, eyes sharp as glass. "Are you accusing me? I heard it from Elena's own lips. You threatened her father. You said you'd ruin her medical license, and you took the letter she wrote to me." Vivian let out a dry chuckle. "A mother does what she must to protect her son. You didn't need some penniless surgeon dragging down the Hayes name." "You mean you destroyed my choice?" Julian's voice broke. "You ruined the only thing I ever believed in?" Vivian didn't flinch. "Love? That foolish thing?" Julian stepped back, a hollow ache settling in his chest. "If you did what she says, I'll never forgive you." He walked away into the storm, his heart a tangle of fury and regret. For the first time, Julian understood if he ever wanted to have Elena again, he would have to fight. Not against her, but against the past he had allowed to blind him for too long. 2 weeks had passed since Julian stormed out of his mother's estate, his chest hollow with betrayal. He hadn't spoken to Elena. Not yet. He couldn't. But in silence, he began to rebuild. He reopened investigations, tracked financial threads connected to Carter Medical, dug through his mother's legal history, and day after day, he watched Elena from afar, silently, reverently, as if distance could become redemption. Elena didn't know. She immersed herself in surgery, in routine, in silence. The pregnancy had reached week 36. The twin girls inside her moved more every day, as if reminding her that time waits for no one. Then came the storm. Snow slammed into the city hard and fast. As she left the hospital after a long shift, pain seized her belly. Her water broke in the hallway. Labor came swiftly at St. John's. Dr. Naomi stayed by her side, shouting orders. She's carrying twins, history of hypertension. Prepare for transfusion. Julian got Naomi's call and drove through the blizzard, heart pounding like the wind outside. Down the corridor, Julian sprinted into the hospital, snow clinging to his coat. He had dropped everything, driven through the blizzard, heart pounding with panic. Naomi met him in the hallway, pale. She's in labor, but she's hemorrhaging. We're doing everything we can. Julian didn't wait. He burst into the delivery room, ignoring the nurse's protests. Elena lay motionless, her face ghostly pale, blood spreading across the sheets. Machine screamed. He dropped to his knees, grabbed her cold hand. "Elena," he choked. "Don't leave me. I was wrong. I love you. Please, stay alive." For them. And then the cries came. One, then another. 2 baby girls. But Julian didn't look at them. His eyes stayed on the woman who had once been his everything. In that moment, all the power in the world meant nothing, except for the chance that she might live. Morning light spilled through the maternity ward's windows, casting a soft glow across Elena's pale but peaceful face. 2 weeks had passed since the snowstorm nearly took her life. She had survived, but something inside her had been broken long before that night. Sophie and Clara, her twin daughters, slept soundly in their bassinets beside her. Pink-cheeked, breathing steadily, they were miracles. Elena looked at them with quiet love and fierce resolve. Julian had stayed by her side while she was unconscious, holding her hand, whispering for her to wake, but when she finally opened her eyes, he had retreated behind his familiar mask, cold, controlled, guarded. As if the words he spoke during the storm were nothing more than a moment of weakness. Elena knew the truth. She had fulfilled the contract, and now she needed freedom, not just for herself, but for Sophie and Clara, innocent souls who deserved more than to grow up inside a glass-walled estate, wrapped in silence and control. She called Naomi. "I have to leave," Elena said calmly. "Far from here, for them, and for me." Naomi understood. She didn't ask questions. Elena penned a short note and left it on the hospital desk. No explanations, no apologies. "Julian, I kept my promise. Let me go." Elena. 3 days later, in the early morning mist, a car pulled away from St. John's Hospital, carrying a mother, her daughters, and a heart, quietly stitched back together with pain and hope. Autumn in Portland painted every corner of the city in soft gold. Maple leaves drifted like whispers. Start over. Elena lived in a modest apartment near the park, using the name E.C. Rowan. No more operating rooms, no lab coats. She had stepped away from medicine to raise her daughters in peace and to find herself again. By day, she walked Sophie and Clara through quiet paths around the lake, visited used bookstores, and hummed lullabies. By night, when the girls slept, she painted. It was the only way she could breathe. Her canvases spilled emotion, hands reaching, pulsing hearts, snowstorms, and eyes the color of memory. She signed her work EC and quietly submitted them to a small gallery in Portland's art district. No one knew the artist had once held lives in her hands. Meanwhile, in New York, Julian stood in the now empty room where Elena had once slept. Her letter still rested on the desk. He had searched obsessively, called every hospital, hired investigators, chased every thread, but Elena had vanished, like she'd never existed. He went to Naomi. She met his gaze and said only one sentence. She needs space. Let her have it. But Julian couldn't. He had lost her once to pride. This time, he would lose everything if that's what it took, just to find the three girls who had become the very rhythm of his heart. 3 months passed. Julian hadn't stopped searching. Each morning, he woke in the cold silence of his penthouse, his gaze drifting to the empty crib. Each day blurred into the next, hollow with the ache of something vital, lost. One afternoon, while visiting an old friend in the art world, he stumbled upon a local Portland exhibit catalog. A single painting caught his eye, a woman's hand reaching for 2 tiny ones, framed by a snowstorm. At the bottom corner in delicate ink were 3 initials, E.C. Julian froze. He remembered that style. Elena used to sketch after her hospital shifts, quietly, never showing them to anyone. E.C. It was her. The truest, most hidden part of her. Without a word, he booked the next flight to Portland. The gallery was tucked between golden-leaved streets, glass walls reflecting autumn light. Julian didn't expect much, but the moment he stepped inside, his heart nearly stopped. She was there. Elena stood under soft light, wearing a simple linen dress, holding Sophie, while Clara slept peacefully in the stroller. The sunlight kissed her brown hair, her profile glowing with quiet strength. Julian couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He simply watched, as if even one step closer might shatter the moment. Elena looked up, their eyes met, a silence louder than any storm. Elena froze as she spotted Julian among the crowd, his eyes locked on her and their daughters, unblinking, no suit, no CO facade, just a man whose gaze carried more sorrow than words ever could. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, gently adjusting the scarf over Sophie's face. Julian stepped closer, but stopped a respectful distance away. "I know, but I saw your painting and I knew it was you. I couldn't walk away." Elena looked at him, her eyes no longer burning with anger, just quiet exhaustion. "I started over, Julian, somewhere peaceful. You being here, it stirs everything up." He swallowed hard. "I'm not here to take the girls. I don't want to take your freedom. I just needed to know you were alive. And to ask for a chance to make things right." "With what, Julian? You once used money to control me, a contract to bind me, lawyers to protect yourself. What do you have now?" He took a shaky breath. "Only the truth. And time, if you'll let me offer it." Under the warm light of the gallery, Elena didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. In her arms, Sophie stirred. Clara slept peacefully. Elena looked at her daughters, then back at Julian, and for the first time, her eyes didn't fully close. Julian Hayes, once the head of a billion-dollar financial empire, now lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Portland. No assistants, no driver, no boardrooms of glass and steel. He shopped for groceries himself, made his own coffee, learned how to cook oatmeal in the mornings, and quietly visited the art gallery every week to look at paintings signed EC. He didn't call, he didn't push, he didn't show up uninvited. He simply existed, patiently, silently. Elena knew he was in Portland. The city was too small to miss the familiar tall frame passing a bakery or wheeling a bike through the park. She never approached him, but each time she saw him bending down to pick up a dropped glove for a stranger's child or exchanging a quiet smile with the old bookseller, something inside her softened. He had changed, no longer the man who commanded. He was learning how to listen, even when she said nothing at all. Late at night, Elena left the gallery after an exhibition that had lasted over 8 hours. The winter wind cut through her thin coat, making her shiver with each gust. She let out a sigh, clutching a folder of artwork drafts tightly in her hands, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Then, at the far end of the glass corridor, she saw a familiar silhouette. Julian. He leaned against the stone railing. No phone, no bodyguards. In one hand, a container of hot soup, in the other, a thick gray coat, the one she'd left in his car months ago. "You always forget to dress warm," he said gently, no hint of judgment. Alina paused. She didn't ask why he was there. She didn't ask how long he'd been waiting. She just nodded, stepped forward, and took the coat. "Thank you. I wasn't sure if you'd eaten yet, so..." He offered the soup, just vegetables, but it's warm. She accepted it, the warmth seeping into her palms, and deeper, into something far more fragile inside her. She hesitated, then opened the door to her small apartment. The golden light spilled softly across the threshold. "If you're not busy, would you like some tea?" Julian looked up, surprised for a moment. Then he smiled, not triumphant, not expectant. "I'm free," he said simply. The door closed gently behind them, and for the first time between them, there was no contract, no past debts, only silence. Just enough to begin again. The next morning, Elena woke earlier than usual. Soft sunlight poured through the curtains, warming the wooden floor and something inside her. Julian had left before dawn, but on the kitchen table, he'd left a small handwritten note. "Thank you for letting me stay, Jay." She held the note in her fingers, heart quiet, no promises, no expectations, just gratitude, as light as breath. And it was that simplicity that made her chest tighten. The entire day, Elena couldn't fully focus. She couldn't forget the way he cradled Clara, his arms unsure but careful. It wasn't the image of a CEO. It was the image of a man learning how to love, slowly and sincerely. That evening, after Sophie and Clara had drifted to sleep, Elena stood before the mirror. She was no longer the woman from 5 years ago, the one forced to leave. Nor was she just a single mother surviving. She was Elena Carter, doctor, mother, and a woman with the right to choose. And tonight, she wanted to choose. She picked up her phone. For the first time, she was the one calling Julian. When he answered, his voice was surprised. "Elena?" She didn't say much, just one sentence. "Are you free tomorrow? I want you to have dinner with us." Not out of obligation, not for the past, but because she wanted him to be part of her present. Dust settled softly over the small house near Portland's Park. The breeze carried the scent of pine and the sound of children's laughter into the kitchen, where Elena was chopping vegetables. She glanced out the open window. Julian was pushing Clara's stroller, while Sophie clung to his leg, begging to be picked up. No more contracts, no more conditions, no more silence dressed as control. Just a family, imperfect but real. Julian fumbled while feeding the girls, spilling porridge on his shirt, frantically wiping it with his sleeve. Elena laughed, her eyes warm in a way that even surprised her. She wasn't guarded anymore, no longer cautious. Because the man in front of her was no longer the cold CEO. He was a father learning to love, and a partner willing to step back so she could move forward. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep, they sat outside on the porch, hand in hand, watching the stars. "Elena," Julian whispered, "if you'll let me, I'd like to stay, not to fix things, but to build, slowly, honestly." She turned to him, didn't answer with words, just rested her head on his shoulder and nodded. And in that moment, there was no ending, only a beginning, not of redemption, but of choice. A love once shattered, now rebuilt by her will, her timing, and her choice, to open the door again, not for the past, but for the future she would write.